first question I want to ask is the how did you become a lighting designer question, and I just want to frame this by saying that I've asked each of them to come up with a sort of 3 to 4 minute answer, which is, again, nowhere near enough time to discuss this in depth, but just so we can have that in the room and said, and then move on to these other questions, which will, again, not begin to capture anything, but just to get some sense of how, some sense of the thing and some sense of how your brains are working. So,
Tyler, please.
A lighting
Oh, thank you.
what was your totally concise journey?
Let's see if I can make it concise. It was I started getting involved in high school and then in college. I was sort of drawn to this. I was sort of drawn to the science of optics and the creativity of visual artists.
What do you mean by the science of optics?
I mean, I was always interested in science, but then in physics, I studied a lot of optics and was just interested in how light and lenses and all that behaved, and lasers and things like that. But then I was inspired by another Tyler Michelot, who was a painter, and I went out west. I skipped out of school for a while and then went out west and spent some time with him, and came back to school and created a design major, if you will, in lighting. And then I did not go the graduate school route. Like a lot of lighting designers do these days, I think. But I apprenticed with a lot of really amazing people and came to the city and I've been applying my craft here.
Excellent. Thank you. Justin.
3 to 4 minutes is sort of the softball. My mother is a painter, was a painter, a fine artist, and my father is an electrical engineer, and so I used to think that combination was what made that sort of possible for me. And then I recognized recently that my father remarried, and he married a woman in finance. And so it was sort of high in the finance industry, and so it was sort of interesting to see that actually it's the triangle for me have helped sort of inform or become the sort of the air that we breathe, or that I breathe growing up and around those ideas.
Finance? Because of the incredibly lucrative nature of the career.
that was the part I didn't hear. No, the idea that so much of this, for me, so much of this job is actually about budgeting and precision, both the time, fiscally, equipment. That there's a math side of it that's not just the engineering of the cones of light, but also the sort of how are we going to solve this resource problem. And I'm sort of interested in the resource problem of we have this much tech time, we have this much equipment, we have this much power in this room. How do you start to engineer or facilitate those in ways that fit back into the getting back to the storytelling, getting back to the art of the thing. And so, sort of stumbling through high school, trying to find a place for myself, and then said, from now on, I'm never going to do this because my father told me I'm going to do something important, and I didn't know what that was. And so I snuck back into the theater in college and found a great mentor who actually became a mentor, or who is a mentor for many of our colleagues, Jane Cox and Ben Stanton, and et cetera. Many people came out of that program. This is a state program at UMass.
So who was the mentor?
Penny Remsen took care of us. Sort of
She's the one I want to take out
stick.
to dinner, actually, because she is the sort of source of a lot of these amazing.
Yeah, Tracy Kleiner. It goes on and on. Yeah.
So you both had it was a fine art plus a math science head kind of colliding. Is that common for many? Is that sort of the general way for lighting designers, or are there others? I mean, Justin, you had said something to me. You said that a lot of lighting designers were former drummers.
Well, I mean, Stanton is, Brent Lilienthal is. There's certainly to say that.
No, I think that's
that drummers exist in our business, and Sailor
I had a
is
drum
true.
kit in the shop.
Yeah. Oh, cool.
College.
Did you?
I did.
You play drums?
Yeah.
I'm terrible rhythm. Perhaps you saw it tonight, but I'm terrible rhythm. I've sort of sent I'll be tapping away, and all of a sudden there's like, where are you, Justin? I think I did that in a sort of marching band one time. It was a disaster.
Okay, but talk. I'm sorry.
No. One of the questions you asked was, like inspirations, and set designers maybe
Yeah.
have a visual appreciation for visual art, and would you say sound designers have an appreciation for music? What do lighting designers get inspired by? And
Yeah.
I was thinking about that, and I'm like, well, it's actually visual arts and music.
Mm-hmm.
And the music that we're speaking of with drumming, and you just said you don't have a good sense of rhythm, but I bet you have a better sense than you admit to. But it's an interest in rhythm, either dramatic rhythm, musical rhythm, because it's a time-based.
Okay, talk about, if you could talk about,
So-
yeah, it's a time-based form, because we're a little bit edging on the verge of what is another hugely fascinating aspect of lighting design, which is that it is a form which has a vocabulary which is nonverbal, and what it is to bring this vocabulary into the room with people who are dealing with a play which is made up of words, and they tend to be, people tend to be verbal people, and how the lighting designer and the director communicate and find a common language, or don't find a common language and yet still productively move forward, despite the fact that it's just kind of hieroglyphs in a sense. You have, it's hard for people to talk using their language. So when you're starting to talk about rhythm, and you're talking about drumming, and you're talking about a time-based art, I don't know, could you talk a little bit more about that?
I mean, I think certainly in pre-production for me, I'm most happy when the conversation has nothing to do with light and all to do with structure and rhythm and a movement, or how the piece evolves is what I want to get to, as opposed to, well, I think side light looks great in the first scene. I don't even know how to talk about specificity in that sense. I'm cataloging it. It's my job to get the machine running, but I'm much more interested in saying, I feel like we don't have access to everybody in the first scene. Oh, okay. Well, what does that mean? And that becomes a conversation that I can engage in and participate in.
So at what point will you make the decision to use side light, and what will prompt you to think that side light is the right?
Oh God.
We'll start just turning things on, and one of them might be the side light.
Okay, all right, then this leads to my other question, which is how much, of course you prep before you go into a tech, but as a lighting designer, you have been to you have read the script, I don't know how many times, possibly just once, possibly many times. You have had discussions with the director. The playwright is almost never involved in that.
Sadly.
Very sadly. Very sadly. And you've been to a couple of run-throughs in the room, and then you get into tech, and you've just been teching umpteen million other shows, which have been also preoccupying you, and get into this tech. And I guess it's almost a percentage question. Like, how much do you have? Like, is it you have 30% worked out, that ends up being what you thought it would be, and then 70% is in the room? And in the room, how much of it is just sort of semi-randomly flipping through possibility, and how much of it is you've worked out a very narrow range that you're going to sort of flip through to see how that functions, or are you testing out theories and seeing if they fly, and then testing out whole new theories? What's going on?
It's sort of a devised improvisation. I mean, in a way. I mean, we're basically preparing a vocabulary for when we get in the room, so that we can respond to those conversations and stuff we've been sort of accumulating. But the run through we see, which is really important, where we've actually seen what they've been working on for several weeks, the actors, the director, the playwright. But really, we're just, again, not seeing what's happening until they actually get into the space, the environment that the play's going to live in. And so much of, we try, I think, jump in here. I think, we're just basically trying to come up with as many ways to respond to that space and to the material in a way that'll help it gel.
Yeah, I mean, there's this horrifying moment that you sort of hear the play, for me, hear the play, read the play, okay, great, and then I sort of respond to the space and the play, right? So make a sort of architectural response of, oh, here's a way the light might get into this room in a way that's unique or interesting, or could fight against what the space is doing. Here's and okay, then the budgeting aspect of like, here's actually what we can provide, and then and for me, you focus the lights, you point them without an actor, and that's a sort of, oh, okay, there's a discovery.
Right, that's that sort of intermediate step where we actually are also responding.
To the room.
Yeah, and enhancing the vocabulary that we came in with, like the tools and the nuts and bolts, but then until we actually turn on a light and see how it's going to react to that yellow wall with all that great texture on it and stuff like that.
And I think Tyler and I are designers who get in a bit of trouble for that. Meaning that I hope, or if I may, that I think I enter into work that you sort of say, I don't know, put that light over there and turn it on. And then I actually, there's a joyous response that I'll have at a focus call. Look at how great that is. The electricians will turn to me and go, well, didn't you know? I mean, I put it there. It was a lot of work to put it there. So like, why are you excited to discover this? Because certainly you knew. And I said, well, no, I didn't. I had a hunch. We looked at it. We thought about it. I think the color's wrong. Do you have any of that softer blue color? You mean, but there's a discovery in that. And I think that's what I love that idea of that we're sort of setting ourselves up to improvise. That you don't just show up and say, I don't know, what do you want to talk about? That we have some tools, have some responses to the play that says, maybe the play ends with a ceiling of light bulbs. Well, there's no light bulbs anymore. But we had to bring in an impulse that says, we'll try it like this. And won't it be exciting when the wall opens and there's a ceiling of light? It's not exciting. And so it didn't in the end happen, right? But I think you have to move the chess piece forward. You have to start the game in some ways to be able to study the next problems that evolve. Otherwise, we're always saying, what's the opening move? It's like, oh, let's create some.
And oddly, the more constructed you come, if you come into the room with something that's been hashed out in such detail, inevitably you're going to walk in the room and an actor will get on stage and be, it's not right at all. And you may spend more time undoing what you were trying to do than if you come in with flexibility and be a little more improvisatory with it.
And so I can imagine it must be horrifying for some directors. And you can watch them as they sort of evolve with a conversation with my, we sort of say, oh, I'm game to play, as opposed to I know exactly what I'm doing. Right. And so I have a sense of, and you can sort of, and directors can leave me on my own, and off I'll go, I'll light the play. And they can sort of ignore me until we open the show, or we can have this conversation along the way. And it's interesting to see how those develop and how we're making, is it only responding to the work on stage that it's happening? Or are they just waiting for me to catch up and light them because clearly nothing's going to change? So turn the lights on over there now. It doesn't matter if the light comes into the door and that's interesting. I didn't do that in rehearsal, in the rehearsal hall. Oh,
right.
When do these moments?
Right, so that's the whole other wild thing, like the degree to which you have your way of doing things, and it's so much about the chemistry of the director and their way of doing things. And are your ways of doing things fruitful, or are they a little bit at cross purposes?
Well,
is there too much frustration for it to be a viable way of continuing forward?
I mean, I would propose it sort of. As I work, it's my job to sort of to follow to end up being the dancer that joins the party and starts to and changes it or makes it different because of my presence. So that I'm not just saying, do it my way, I am here now, is a hard energy for me to bring in that I don't really trust. So, well, you've been doing it wrong in rehearsal for weeks. Now that you're here, do it this way. Is hard. Is something I don't really know how to bring to the
and what you're hoping for is like a creative tension. I think if it's too easygoing, where everyone's like, "Oh, I love what you're doing," and you say, "Well, I love what you're doing," then it's just mush on stage. So I think it's helpful if there is a bit of a creative tension where maybe the director's a little unsure about what you're doing, but maybe you're going to lead them somewhere, or oftentimes the director's going to lead you someplace that you haven't been or haven't tried, and so you sort of go with that. But it's not necessarily a comfortable place to be.
I mean, it's hard, right? And even now, it's like, what are we talking about? We're painting pictures live that people are responding to, and it's both the director responding to and the performer responding to, that the whole room is trying to figure out, is this the moment that we're painting the picture correctly? And of course, painting suggests snapshot or stillness, and so that's not what we're doing at all, right? So there's a sort of hands in the dough engagement that lighting is different, and so even our vocabulary is a little sloppy as we try. We heard it tonight. It's a little sloppy as we try and communicate.
I mean, this is all why I, as a playwright, love the fact of lighting design very much, because you come into tech and the set has already been built, and hopefully you love it. But if you don't, it's already been built, and there's no room in the budget to change it. Do you know what I mean?
So who do you turn to?
The costume, the costume, the costumes have mostly been purchased. There's some leeway there. But light is something which is being created in the room in response to the thing, and all throughout the preview process. The tech process is hugely led by the needs of the lighting designer, or it's sort of can be a close combat between the stage management and lighting design as to who can get the most time to get things done. But those are the really huge forces in tech. But over the preview process, the lighting designer is still there in the room and still continuing to respond. And as the play finds itself and as the play refines itself and discovers itself, light is right there, discovering it alongside of it and bringing that discovery forward. So it's as plastic and mobile and creative as the process itself. Do you know what I mean? There's nothing fixed in that way, which is, gorgeous. I mean, it a little bit sounds, the way you describe coming into the situation, it a little bit sounds to me like film acting. Do you know, where you do all the prep in the world, ideally, and then you come in and people do, knowing that they're going to do 5 or 6 or 10 takes, kind of try to come up with a thing which they didn't quite think they would come up with. Do you know? Or I don't know enough about music, but improvisation in music. Like, yes, you have all of your tools laid out, but you come at it with this willing spirit of saying, I'm prepared enough to jump into the void and see what happens next.
And I think it's that magic. I hope it's both listening and moving forward at the same time. That it's open-hearted and it's sitting in the room and sort of watching what's being made in front of us. At the same time as it's offering more and pushing the event and the ideas and the thinking forward. That it's not just responsive thinking and it's not just progressive. Here's my idea. Do it this way. That it sort of runs in tangent.
But that push and pull is really fascinating to me also, that you are, the degree to which you have to be flexible in terms of ideas. That you can be, and this is, I guess, is another question, like, how often does it happen that you're following a lighting idea you think is actually genius and really serves the play, and how often do you run into a director who doesn't understand it or doesn't believe in it or doesn't want it and just clamps on what you think is a really fruitful line of development, and then you go off in this other way, which is not as interesting to you, but which, you've got to come up with a light design, like you've got to stay in the room.
I mean, almost every show. But
yeah,
because it's not so much about, because it's like, I mean, it's my job, I think, to pull at the leash, that I am just raring and pushing and finding and chasing, and I'm fine. No, I've got the right idea. It's over here. No, Justin, you're doing it wrong. Well, but. Oh, there's another idea over here.
I mean, it's a question of. I mean, to me, the director is ultimately the leader of the endeavor, and so I have to put some trust that. I guess. Well, there are times, I guess, when the leadership, maybe, in my opinion, is going astray. But or is taking us to a place that's not ultimately going to be. I don't know. It's not necessarily beholden to my own idea, but in a sense, like maybe it's sort of like the Paul of your play, and with regards to the playwriting, and but I mean, that's the agreement. I mean, that I've made is that this person is our leader, and ultimately they're holding the leash. And maybe you don't have to go on that same walk again.
Well, and I hope too that there's a moment then when there's a course correction, that that course correction can for me be heartbreaking sometimes, and it's really okay, here we are over here, and that there's a saying, well, that there's the yes and that's built into it. It's like, okay, that's not quite interesting over here, but if we're going to be in these kind of waters, it might be more like this that is interesting. That I feel like it's my job to, as quickly as I can, sort of pick my heart back up and say, all right, if we're going to be in this landscape, in these sort of rules or structures that I hear you pushing towards, here's how I can move forward this way.
Do you find that sometimes you'll be in one process and you will be thwarted in a certain kind of way, and you'll go off into an area you wouldn't have gone into, but that by playing around in that area you find and discover things which then make you sort of more wide-ranging as an artist in another process?
It's why I love doing this.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
That's why
so
I
that
love
it's
doing
that.
this.
I mean, I have sort of 3 related questions, all of which really lead up to the question of, like, how do you guys, it seems to me like such a splendid profession, but also a profession which is so much about negotiating resoluteness and flexibility. I had asked them if they had any questions that they never got asked. And you asked me...
right, at the last minute from the bar?
Yeah. You said the playwright never asks you what do you think of the play, and I will tell you why not. Because the playwright knows that you didn't come onto this because you loved the play. The playwright knows that you are doing 14, 15 projects a year, and you're taking the gig. And the playwright thinks the lighting designers are pretty cool, and kind of fears their opinion and doesn't want to know if they are not
This is
loving
playwrights
the
in general, of
projects.
course.
Wow.
Well, I'm going to speak universally here. I'm sure it's true. But a thing which was very interesting to me when I had actually been working on this, I'd been taking notes in tech rehearsals for years and years and years, and it was pretty late in the game, a couple years ago, that Emma Griffin said, well, do you know about this headset world? I was like, I had no idea about the headset world. And you're not allowed to go on headset, certainly if you're a playwright, and directors don't go on headset. Headset world is its own specialized, private, well-regulated place.
With notable exceptions.
With notable exceptions. Well, so we did Mr. Burns with Justin, and so he let me go on headset because he thought it sounded like a cool project. And so I was on headset, and I'd been on headset for a while, and I was just sitting, quietly behind Justin with my own secret little headset feed, just, kind of listening to him and the stage management and programmers talk. And toward the very end of Mr. Burns, there's a scene where a family has died, and then they come back as angels, and they're sort of climbing up on top of the houseboat, and we were having sort of a problem making it clear that they were dead, and Justin was watching this, and he said, like, not critically at all, but just like, oh, but shouldn't they have wings? I was like, oh, yes, they should have wings, that's brilliant. And I went over to Steve, the director, and I said, okay, don't say anything to Justin. Don't say this out loud to anyone right now, because I need Justin to continue to forget that I'm on headset. But here's this great idea. He's like, oh yes, that is a great idea. So I was like, damn, how many super smart ideas are the designers? I mean, that's always the question in any room. Like, people are having many super smart ideas which are not being voiced for various reasons about the hierarchy of information in the theater, which are basically sounds a little bit problematic in other ways. I was like, wow, how many brilliant ideas that could really clarify the show are you guys sitting on? Because it is, as they say, a phrase that I kind of both admire and despise, not my department. Do you know, which is related to the other question of, you guys, I go into tech, a playwright goes into tech, I mean, if you go into tech twice a year, that's a lot. Directors are in tech 4 or 5 years or 6 times a year if they're really grinding it. You guys are in tech all of the time. Tech is really hard. You are working these incredibly late hours. You are in these very stressed processes after very stressed processes after very stressed processes. I know it's really dynamic. I know it's kind of like Crazy Wolf on Wall Street guys or whatever is going on. But I guess, yes, this makes me how do you guys take this? I mean, it's so interesting. It's like, just seems like a really interesting...
How do we take it?
Yeah, well, you're coming up with brilliant ideas. You're not saying them. You're expressing them through other mediums. You're working really late in the night after really late in the night after really late in the night after really late in the night. It seems like a very beautiful and heroic life to me, but it also seems really hard. How come you're still doing it?
I guess I never thought of that. Just seemed kind of like, why would you ever get off the ride? I mean, you're sitting and complaining and it's hard and boring and awful and oh my God, this is amazing. I mean, I get to be in that's my office. I sit in the center of that room and a play is made in front of me time and time and time again. For me, it's just, I'm in the center of the room and they let me figure it out. Wow! Wow! And then everyone else comes back, but there's this little window where it's sort of mine to figure out and help make, and the ownership is not like, hey everybody, sit down, this is my show now. It's this amazing participation with this creation and storytelling and making, and so I'm happiest when I have no idea what's happening in front of me, because then there's that communication or discovery with the room of what we actually are making, as opposed to, bang, ta-da, okay, we can go home now. We're actually making something that's unique and surprising is where I'm hoping to get. And wow, how often do we have that? And I don't know how to get off this ride. And
And watching mistakes being made in the theater is really fun.
Do you want to?
Well, I mean, the finished product or
Mhm.
product. I mean, what we bring to the audience is we hope is as exciting to them. But I mean, we getting to see moments happen for the first time, even if they're
Yeah.
a mistake moment. We're seeing it happen for the first time, and that's really thrilling.
Well, you guys are like options central. You know, you're
Yeah.
awash in the options for the, which leads to this is a question Raphael had, which I thought was great. I've always, the thing I have always wished I could do would be to see a play, the same play, lit by 4 or 5 times, lit by 4 or 5 different designers, lighting designers, just to see what the different brain is
Right.
when it comes to that. And Raphael's question was, when do you know you're watching great lighting design from your peers? And what are the qualities you look for and maybe steal?
I mean, I saw the show for the first time tonight, and there were definitely a couple moments I was like, oh, yeah. No, because I mean, I think we recognize beauty, visual beauty, and beauty and performance, and I think for me anyway, I can just if there's a beautiful cue.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's a beautiful moment in the play as well, but sometimes we can separate the beauty, the visual beauty, from the context of the play or whatever it's in, and then maybe apply that somewhere else further down the line. I mean, it's not being very clear, but yeah, I mean, I definitely had a couple moments tonight. I'm like, oh, that's a great composition of in color combination, what have you. You know, is it perfect for this moment? I don't know, but I enjoyed it, and you know, it might be something that I might try to do somewhere else, but figuring out a different context is never the same. You know.
I'm not sure that if you lined up 4 lighting designers and we all did the same play, that it would be the same play.
Mm.
Right.
That I really think that the lighting designer serves as a sort of visual dramaturg or visual creator in this sort of magic tech week. That we have a plan, we have an idea, but the rhythm and the structure of how the play is made, I think the role I play is finding that with the company. And it can be totally subtle, it can be just in the cueing and the making, and it certainly comes with the sound designer too, of what those rhythms start to make. But within those relationships and those discoveries, I like that, I'm sure that the play couldn't be the same. The production wouldn't just be pretty different. Oh, Justin used blue in that scene. How unique! We would actually see the muscle of the play would be a different manifestation. As a visual curator, I mean, we're visual curators. We're saying, look here, don't look here, or look everywhere at once. It's going to be hard, or here's how we, and then that makes the director say, oh, well, in that case, hold still.
Mm-hmm.
As opposed to, you know, there's a response, and then say, oh, this is the way this light works. Don't do anything. It's better this way. So, yeah.
Going back again to this question of inspiration, what percentage of you, break it down into percentages. I mean, as you walk through the city, are you constantly being, you know, is natural light a continual source of inspiration? More so than light as it's depicted in paintings, or just the experience of looking at fine visual art, or watching the work of other designers, do you know what I mean? Like what degree of it is art, and what degree of it is nature, and what degree of it is
I mean, attention to light,
sort of
for me,
non-visual.
I mean, I think it's a personal thing, but for me, light and nature trumps all. I mean, that just because most of our experiences outdoors are, but, and then, you know, below that would be like cinematic, lighting, fine art, you know, lighting and fine art.
I've been trying to figure out about this a lot, because I sort of grew up in
it kind of fluctuates.
Yeah, and I grew up in like a Hopper household. Like we had Hopper books in my household, and Goya, and we sort of, so this was like a conversation that wasn't ever like, Justin, this is, you know, you're just laying there, you're just a little kid, you poke at these things. And we grew up around museums and crazy artists from the 70s who were like, this is music when the TV changes channels. That was, you know, oh, okay. You know, to a 10-year-old, you're, it doesn't sound like music to me. You're crazy. So now I'm starting to think, for me, I'm interested in like the energy of light and the storytelling aspect. So in some ways, and I'm not in some ways I'm more inspired by like comic books and movies movies for color palette, comic books for how they're telling a story, or comic panels for how we're sort of understanding composition or how things are being revealed to us. And I get a little lost in the how do I recreate this Hopper painting, and because I don't know how to make these tools behave that way, because there's always little bits of lies in them, and I get frustrated with those lies, and then I get confused and I don't know what to chase, because they're in the end they're cones of light and the sun is parallel light, all right? And so when we see these, and that is a very, so the geometry or the is really important to me of how I think about light.
I grew up in the woods in Maine, so that's.
This is awesome, right? Yeah, exactly, right?
We're almost out of time, but I said I would leave room for questions. I almost didn't, but does anyone have a question?
You, as lighting designers, can you recall any particular epiphanies as an LD? Like just say, a particular combination of light and shadow or colors that just sort of you just said, oh my God, this is special.
I mean, I think there's hundreds of little epiphanies every day, maybe. I mean,
that's interesting. The idea that in fact tuning, I think of it as tuning a rig, that you're actually trying to figure out what the rules are for this play in this space and this time, and this director and this company, and this director. Like there are shows I do that if I like that there's a flick of a shadow. Oh, do you see that shadow, Justin? In scene 4, when they said this word, there's a shadow there. You've got to chase it, and versus. Discoveries here, that sort of lovely moment of discovering, like, oh, low light just gets in their eyes and it's great. It's just easy for days. You can sort of have a great theatricality and see people. They should use footlights for a century. They have. But, right?
Not like these.
Yeah, they're fancier. Yeah, so I think those epiphanies are rediscoveries of things like, oh, look, shape. How interesting that shape is. And how it fits in the room, as opposed to, for me, pink and blue look nice together. I get worried when I sort of know the rules, and I'm always trying to figure out what they aren't, or how to make them the opposite.
Yeah, I mean, I know I store a ton away. I mean, I just love looking at images and but I have no idea why or for what reason necessarily. I actually don't necessarily like doing research that's specific to a project. That bores me actually to some extent. Maybe if there's something I need to know, but for the most part I just like looking at stuff generally, and then something will click in later, and then maybe I'll go after that or share it with the others.
Do we have another question? Yeah.
Are there aesthetic criteria that govern when you want the audience to be aware of the light and when you don't?
So I believe that we can't forget about the machine of it. So I'm aware of that, and I'm also aware that my light can illuminate the light, and I can also hide it and be secret about it. And depending on what the story needs, that there's something really amazing about a completely masked show where you can't tell the structure and the machine and the rig, and there's a beautiful sunrise, and I go, wow, there's a sunrise on stage. How amazing. I don't believe the sun's over there, but I really love this moment.
It's evocative.
It's evocative, and yet I find myself more often involved in work that's sort of celebrating its theatricality and saying, here's the muscle of the machine, and then within that, then and this play has this problem, the meta. How do we hide the theatricality that we already know is already there?
Right. Yeah, I mean, I in the last year or two, I've been getting involved in more and more musicals, and so that's something where you can really show your hand in terms of the use of light, and it's really fun to call attention to it, especially in support of music. It's really invigorating.
All right, we're at time.
All right, we did it.
Thank you so much, you guys.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ed.